Hello, everyone. I see we've still got some people joining in. We'll get started in just a couple of minutes. If you have any questions for us throughout the webinar right now or after, or even during the presentation, please go to the Q&A chat box. It's either going to appear in the upper left-hand corner or the bottom of your screen. We won't be paying much attention to the chat feature on this webinar today, so please let us know of anything that you would like to ask in the Q&A chat box. We're going to get started in just a couple minutes. All right, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. We'll get started here. I see that we have quite a few people joining, so I just want to let you know my name is Arwen Heredia. I'll be your Prezi moderator for today's live session. If you have any questions for me or for our presenter as we go through this webinar today, please head over to the Q&A chat box, either in the top left corner or the bottom of your screen, and we will get to those as much as possible throughout the presentation or in the follow-up email that we'll send within the next couple of days. Everybody that is registered for this webinar will receive a recording as well as access to the presentation that you're about to see. So don't worry about that if you have to head out early or anything like that. I would like to welcome David Hooker, Prezi's Head of Creative Services and Lead Evangelist for today's webinar, Creating a Prezi Like a Visual Designer Even If You Aren't One. So thank you once again to everyone for joining us, and I would like to hand it over to David.
Thank you very much, Arwen, for the warm introduction. And thank you, everyone, for attending. It's nice to see so many people. As Arwen mentioned, I have two roles here at Prezi. I've been here for almost 5 years now. And those roles are leading two of our teams, the Creative Services team and the Evangelism team. Creative Services is the section at Prezi that builds Prezi for our top customers. So this is a picture of the team. I just like to put them in there. You won't know who they are, but you will hopefully know companies like the ones in the top right-hand corner, people like Fujitsu and UNICEF, and we have a whole list of other ones that we build some really great presentations for some high-stakes keynotes. These can be presentations in huge arenas. We did one for IBM once in Las Vegas, where there were 12,000 people in the audience. So the team and I have quite a lot of experience of building presentations for really important companies and really important events. And as well as the Creative Services team, the other team I lead is the Evangelism team, which do very similar work, as in we build Prezi presentations for things like South by Southwest and probably most famously TED. And I think our most famous person that we've worked with so far is Bono, who was lead singer of a small band called U2, I believe. So anyway, that's just the part of the presentation where I kind of justify the skills and expertise in the fact that I work with some very talented people who build some really great presentations for some really important events. I myself am not a designer. I didn't go to design school. I'm pretty useless when it comes to Photoshop, although I am learning. I know the difference between Photoshop and Illustrator, but not much more than that. So I'm going to bring to you some of the core guiding principles that we use to make a Prezi. So these are principles that you can use whether you're a designer or not, whatever level of your design skills, what they may be. And I'm going to include some kind of hints, tips, tricks, even some people might call them hacks, for things that you can do, readily access, that won't cost you anything more than your email address, to make you a really great Prezi. And so I'm going to take you through those today. I'm really looking forward to the Q&A section of this presentation because I can answer specific questions, and I hope that you will find it useful. So I'm going to kind of talk you through how a presentation gets made, and specifically I'm going to talk about the presentation that you can see in front of you now. So it's quite meta, I think, making a presentation about a presentation that I'm already giving, but I hope that it'll make sense as we go through. So there's 4 areas I'm going to talk about today: outline, and then overview, build, and call to action. So we'll go through them in that order. First, outline. Outline concrete details for your presentation. So this is the part where I guess quite a few people are like, oh, do I have to prepare? I don't have time. I don't want to prepare. And my answer to that is it really doesn't take as long as you think, and it's really worth doing. The other concern that people have about preparing a presentation is, oh, do I have to draw? My drawings are terrible. I'm great with copy paste and cutting things out and doing all kinds of other stuff, but I can't draw with a pen and paper. It's so old school. I'm going to show you a way to do it without having to draw. And I would also add the fact that of the 10 designers I work with, I think only one of them is like really good at sketching. The others have terrible line drawing. So you really don't need to be very good at it. The method that we use every time, all day, is very similar to the one that you would have used if you went to high school or college and ever had to write an essay, in that we write down on a simple piece of paper what we think the introduction to the presentation is, what we think the opening hook is, and then the kind of main body of the presentation with some main points. And then any good essay has some supporting evidence. And then you have your examples and your narrative to go with that. And then finally, your conclusion, where every good conclusion restates the main points. And then you have a call to action at the end. This formula can vary a little bit, but this is broadly speaking what I would say a large percentage of our presentations all include. The opening hook, I think, is very important. Whenever I talk to a new designer or we train someone up to work with a team, I always give the example of the fact that if you ever were to read Nelson Mandela's biography, he doesn't start with, hi, my name is Nelson and I was born in a small village in South Africa and I had a mum and a dad and this many brothers and sisters. His biography starts with the day that he was released from prison. So after 27 years of being in prison, and he starts with that momentous day when he comes out. Why does he do that? Well, it's simply to get you interested and make you read the rest of the book. Oh, how did he get to this point? So when you write an essay or when you give a presentation, start with the most interesting thing, or at least start with something that's compelling that will get people interested. The Matrix doesn't start with Morpheus giving an explanation of how the robots built this and the sky got scores. It starts with people jumping around in leather, kind of kicking each other and shooting guns, which is infinitely more interesting and compelling. But when you get to the point where he takes you through the technical explanation, you're already engaged and you want to know that. So try and bring that same approach to your presentations. Body and main points supporting evidence. Let's say that you're making a pitch deck for your marketing campaign or for something that you're selling. Your main points could be your products. Your supporting evidence is the testimonials from other customers about their products. And the examples in the narrative can be things like specifications or situations, applications like that. Conclusion is always just restating what you've already learned and then trying to get people to take an action, whether it is to buy your product, sign up for the demo, follow us on social media, whatever it be. Every good presentation, I think, ends with a call to action. So how do we translate what is essentially some scribblings on a piece of paper and words into visuals? Well, I'm going to talk about this in more detail in a minute, but when making a Prezi presentation at least, the overview is the most important thing to work on because it's the first image and the last image that everyone is going to see, and it's also the image that you're going to return to again and again. We know for a fact that people remember things in pictures. So getting that first and last picture right and getting it into a place where it supports your narrative and your story or your points is also particularly important to get things done the way that you want them to be. So you want to be in a situation where people walk out of the room and they say, I remember that presentation. That was the one with the coffee pot in it, or that was the one with the mountain, or that was the one with the car in it. They're not going to remember it. That was the one with 6 bullet points on page 2. That's just not the way the mind processes information. So we really spend a lot of time getting that overview looking right, and I will go through how we do that in a bit more detail later. So some of the places to look within your planning for overview are the opening hook. Also, you can look at the conclusion, because this is the message that you wanted people to go out with. So those things that you're either using to grab people's attention or that action that you want them to take at the end, those can really be very good places to look for your overview. Your main points are then the topics, so the bubbles in the presentation, and then your supporting evidence are your subtopics. It's quite simple, but it really will help you when you come to think of your visual and structure your presentation. So then once you've done that part of planning, it's kind of time to think about the layout of your presentation. So whenever we make a Prezi, one of the sins that you can commit is to just throw all of your content out onto the canvas and hope that it will be compelling for people to look at. You need to find at least a loose structure for your content to fit into. The real great advantage of Prezi, of course, is that not only can you show people things visually, but you can show them contextually visually. So what I mean by that is you can structure a presentation like this. You can have problem 1 on the left, problem 2 on the right, and then show the solution in the middle. Other slide-based presentations, you're pretty much limited to left and then right and then right and right again, A, B, C, and D. But allowing yourself to construct your content this way is more visually compelling, because you can show how your solution addresses both problem 1 and problem 2. And you can also go through it in the order that you want. You can go through problem 1 and then go straight to the solution and then to problem 2, or you can go problem 1, problem 2, and back to the solution. This spatial arrangement of information really does help the person you're presenting to better remember what it is that you're talking about. A good visual for this structure could be a simple tug of war. You think you're going to see this as we go through, but the simpler and more universal the metaphor or image that you use for your overview, the better. You're asking people to quickly grasp what it is you're talking about. So you need an image which is strong and recognizable. You don't want something that's abstract and people don't really remember. You're battling, remember, like if you're giving a presentation, you're often battling against the fact that people are hungry or they're tired. And, they've got 101 different things that they would rather be doing at that moment. So if you try to get them with some subtle, abstract, neoclassical piece of art that's monotone, people are not going to pay attention to it. We all really want to avoid cheesy stock photography, so don't go too far, but go simple, memorable, and visually arresting if you can. Another example of a structure, and probably the most common structure that you're going to come across in a presentation, is this step 1, step 2, step 3 type construction. Now, immediately you might be looking at this and thinking, well, that's not really any different from a slide-based presentation. It is largely similar, but it has that subtle distinguisher, which is the fact that I can get bigger as I go along and show how step 3 is more important, or is just there's more going on at step 3 than there was at step 1. You'll find that this is a very common way of structuring your content, because often many things do happen in a linear fashion. A good metaphor for this one is a tree growing. You could also have climbing up a mountain is something that people also get. If it's not quite as high as a mountain, you can have a hill. But anything that gets slowly bigger. We once did a presentation with this structure where we spoke about a coffee pot. So we started with the coffee granules, sorry, the beans, and then we had them processed into granules, and then we had a pot of coffee. So you show that process that everybody knows. I mean, pretty much everyone drinks coffee, or at least knows that other people do drink coffee, and it forms a large part of their day. And so they instantly recognize that metaphor. So now you've done your planning, you've identified the parts of your presentation and where they need to go. You've thought about how to structure the content and drawn a very simple kind of set of circles. And you're thinking about the visual that's going to go with them. So let's see how I would have done this for the Prezi that you're looking at right now. So I've got my piece of paper, and I would note down that I need to have an introduction. And my main point here to all of you is that Prezi is easy and fun. That's my opening hook to get you all in. Then the body of my presentation talks about the overview, outlining, and building. I'm going to talk to you later about how you should use icons and how you can use something called the color picker, which is very cool. I'll get to that in a bit. And then the conclusion is to restate the main points about how easy and fun Prezi is to use. And I'm going to try and get you to take an action, which is to build your own. So how do I take this construction? So I'm going to look for my overview either here or in the conclusion. These are going to be my topic bubbles, and these parts will be subtopics. So now I'm going to think about how I'm going to structure that. So what my structure looks like when I think about it, it's kind of a simple left to right narrative, right? I want to talk about the overview and then the outline, or maybe the outline, then the overview, I'm not really sure. And then I'm talking about build and then call to action. So I also want it to be easy and fun. So I'm not going to do a simple left to right line, but do a line that goes up and down. So we've got that kind of sense of movement as we go through. What's a good visual for, let's go back a second here. So I had Prezi easy and fun as part of my overview. I've got some fun in my structure, but my structure doesn't really tell a story. I could use that mountain idea that we had before, but I don't really want to tell everybody that you're climbing a mountain here. So that's not a great idea. You end up in a place where a really kind of concrete metaphor about a journey is not really going to suit you. So you can use what I call a loose metaphor. And the most common loose metaphor that we use in our presentations is something that somebody will see every day, especially when they're creating, and that's a desk. In this case, it's a very arty desk with a very beautiful blue background. But that's something that people will remember. It's a beautiful image. Like I've gone to a place where you can get really great quality photos, and I'll take you through some of the places you can go to get really great quality images later. But it's something that people easily identify with, and it's relevant to my content. You will more likely than not be making your presentation on your laptop. You probably have a cup of coffee there to try and help you get through. And then I can bring that narrative into the picture. Okay, so now I'm going to talk about that overview and some tips and tricks for how you can get a really great one.
Before we go on, I'm just going to get some questions from the audience here. So it looks like we have a couple of great questions coming in about what you were just talking about. So we're looking to figure out, how did you designate the coffee mug as a focal point for zooming in for subpages?
So you mean the coffee mug that's on this particular presentation? That's a really easy question to answer. Within that image, the coffee mug looks really good. And so you want to draw people's attention to it. It draws attention to itself. It's yellow on a blue background. When you find the image that's really right for you, you'll find that your eyes are drawn to certain parts of it. And, you know, I'm kind of diving into the coffee. So if you've got an image with, and I would suggest that you would have an image that is largely one color, so like maybe white. In this case, it's mainly blue. And those few things that you have on it, you can zoom into and then leave the space for your more concrete topics later.
Great. And speaking of backgrounds, what would you say the ideal size and resolution for the image and the background should be? Is there something that we can give people a guide for choosing that background image? Does that happen automatically inside of Prezi?
So the first and most important thing to remember when looking for a background image for a Prezi presentation is you're looking for something in landscape, because Prezi is designed to work with projectors, monitors, and screens, which are almost always entirely landscape. So look for a landscape picture. If you can, find something that's in the 16:9 ratio, because that's what Prezi likes to output into. If your screen is 16:10, it will structure itself to work with that. But when you're designing on most computers, you're looking at 16:9. If you're the place where you get images from, you're not able to designate that, look for something that's landscape. And then there's a whole variety of free tools. With a Mac, it's Preview. With Windows, it's something like, I haven't used a Windows computer for so long, but I should imagine it's something like Paint, if that still exists. And you can cut to 16:9. The resolution for your image, you want it to be as high as possible. Don't go really, really high, because if you've got a huge, too large an image that you bring in, it's going to take a long time to load each time. But I think something in like a 1080 kind of 1080p kind of that around that is a good place to start.
Great. And we did have one more question coming in that I'll get to right now. There are several other questions, and I do see those, so we'll get to those throughout the presentation as we can. But before I answer this question, I just want to let everyone know that how people are asking these, and it's a great way to ask, is by heading over to the Q&A chat box. Raising your hand or going into the chat function is not the most effective way to get my attention, so definitely head over to that Q&A box and put your question in there, and we'll get to those as we can. Remember that we will do a follow-up after this webinar to get to other questions if we are able to do that, and you will receive a recording of this session as well as a copy or a link to the presentation you're seeing today. So I did have a question here coming from JJ, and you wanted to know if you're able to add voiceovers to a Prezi. The thing about a Prezi presentation, of course, is that it's a live presentation. It's meant to be used as a tool that you're doing as you give a live presentation. So if you, say, did a recording of you presenting the Prezi, then certainly you could add a voiceover to that. But as for adding one to the Prezi itself, that isn't currently a piece of functionality that we have. But back to you, David.
Thank you, and thank you everyone for the questions. Whenever I go to a conference, and for my job, I go to a lot of conferences, I really like a good Q&A session, and I'm the annoying person who goes up to the speaker at the end and annoys them with all kinds of questions about their content. So please do keep those coming in, and I think it's of the most value to you. There might be something that when I was doing the planning for this, I didn't realize or maybe thought wouldn't be important, but turns out to be. So please keep those coming in. I'm more than happy to answer them. So where were we? We were talking about your overview. We talked about how the overview and the structure of your content should overlap or complement each other. But now you're perhaps thinking, okay, that's all well and good for you to say, but where do I find images as good as that one? Or you might be thinking, in order to find an image that good, I need to subscribe to something like Shutterstock or Getty Images or iStock or all of those different providers, but I don't really want to pay for images. The answer to your queries is going to be the fact that there's a whole list of places that you can find really good video, really good visuals, both images and icons on the internet for free. I've listed them all the ones that we use here. As Arwin mentioned, we're going to send out a link to this presentation, so when you get it, you can click on any of these. Most of them do require at least an email address, but don't require any money, or they might have a paid offering, but have substantial free images that you can get. We use a lot of these, whether it just be for inspiration. I'm going to talk about it in more detail later, but the Noun project is a particular favorite of ours for icons. And as icons, they're just so much easier to process than words. That's a fantastic resource. I do spend quite a lot of my time looking through people's presentations from clients or whatever it be and thinking, what's an icon that can go with that word that someone's chosen? But then after I discovered the Noun project, I just type that word in to their search engine, and it comes up with all kinds of ideas. And people remember images better, so try and use them as much as you can. We'll talk about that in a bit more detail later. Oh. Just move on to the next one. The next one is about finding the right colors. So you've structured your content, you've laid it out the way you want, and you've found an image in a 16:9 horizontal landscape ratio that you really love, really speaks to your content, but you're not a designer and you're not sure how you can get colors. So I'm talking about the colors of shapes, the colors of your text, and all of that stuff. Well, this is something that honestly I really struggle with. I didn't go to design school. All of the designers on my team will tell you that I have no sense of taste, and the colors that I pick for things is I don't know what goes with anything else. My wife would also tell you that I don't know how to dress myself properly either, and which is all related to my choice of color. So for people like me, you have the wonderful color wheel at Adobe. There are other services out there that do the same thing, but this is my favorite one. Again, the link is here, and I'm actually going to kind of do a live demo of it just quickly here. But if you were to click and you go to the page, which is going to load, again, this is something that you will need to sign into. It does require your email address, but you don't have to pay. Once you get there, you'll see this up here, this create from image. You click that, and then you can pretty much find any image on here. I'm going to take this one of my CMO, who hopefully isn't watching, and I'm going to bring it in, and you can see that it takes from that photo the 5 strongest colors and lays them out for me underneath. I can then click on this color wheel here, create from color wheel, and that gives me the hex code for each of these colors. So I can take my image, so I'll actually do it for real with the one that I'm using in the presentation, which I know is in this folder, and it's this one, background desk. And just click open, and you can see it's picked out those colors. And when we go back to the presentation, you'll see that it's particularly this yellow that I've used for all of the text and some of the bubbles within the Prezi. The research into colors will tell you that it's a good idea to have at least one colorful and bright color. Apparently yellow is the color that people see first. In this case, I've used yellow because it's the color of the coffee mug, so it's kind of a happy coincidence. But having one bright color will help people remember things better and will help you stand out. So while grays and blacks are very cool, and I know my design team love white because it gives that idea of space and opening, do try to have at least one bright, bold, colorful color to get people's attention. So I'll just go back to my Prezi here. So yeah, once you've found those right colors, you can then bring them in to Prezi. You just need to, when you see it, click the color palette. Once you've clicked the color palette, you'll have an option at the bottom for a custom color. Just copy paste the hex code into that box, and you'll get the exact color to go with your image. And this is great. It really makes you feel like a designer because you've got, you know, algorithm proved colors that go with your really great image. So I think this gives you a real kind of sense of achievement that you've gone and found a really great image from someone else who's curated all of these great images for you, and then you've used someone else's algorithm to find the right colors, and it makes you look like a designer with very little effort. So I can't recommend those highly enough. Now with your overview tackled, I'm going to talk a little bit how to build, and Arwen's going to stop me and ask some questions first.
That's right. So we do have a great question about overviews coming in from Nora Williams. She says that the overview that her company, it looks like, is using is vastly overcrowded. So wants to know if you have any tips for making a more clean and concise overview, but not necessarily having to delete any topics, but maybe organizing them differently in Prezi Next.
So I think Nora's kind of answered her own question there. If you feel that you've got too much stuff going on the overview, you need to go back to that first planning stage and see if some content can fit within other content. Remember, the great thing about Prezi is I can build topics, subtopics, sub-subtopics, sub-sub-sub-subtopics. You can go down a pretty long way So I would look and think, okay, do point 2 and point 3 here. Are they really kind of one and the same thing, or is one an extension of the other? The cleaner your design at the beginning, the better. It looks better. It's less worrisome for people when they see it for the first time. If you walk into a room and someone's got a presentation with, I mean, I remember when I used to work for corporate companies. If I walked into a room, and sometimes you would see before they made the slides full screen, you would see there's 193 slides, and your heart would sink. Having a Prezi with, you know, lots and lots of bubbles on the overview is the equivalent of that. It's saying to everyone, I've got a really long and cumbersome presentation coming up. And however great your design and however good a speaker you are, you're battling against that. So I would say try and find ways to fit content into other content. The wonderful thing about Prezi is it's entirely navigable. So you can choose what content you present and what you don't, and people will never know that you've skipped past things. So really utilize that by getting your content down to just a couple of topics.
Great, and I see a few questions coming in that are specifically about the Prezi Next functionality, and I want to let you guys know that we're not going to get super deep into what Prezi Next does that perhaps some of you who are classic users are not seeing or are seeing appear a little bit differently. I will provide in the follow-ups that we send out in the next couple of days some links for you to get more information about Prezi Next and how that works, and any information that you might need to get some training or some more information on that. But going back into David's presentation here, Steve wants to know if you have a super quick way. How do you most easily bring any hex values or that palette into Prezi? So is there a way to adapt that to an entire presentation all at once, or is that something you have to do individually and manually?
Steve, it is, at least to a degree, manual. There's a couple of things that you can do to make it easier. I use an extension for my MacBook called Jump Cut, which remembers all of the things that I really recently copy-pasted. So you can just go into Adobe and copy all 5 of them, and then Jump Cut allows you to bring up, you can customize it. But I have, for example, the last 90 things that I've copy paste, because in my job I do quite a lot of copy pasting. Don't tell my boss. And so you can use a tool like that, and that way you can just bring up those hex codes when you need them. The other thing within Prezi itself is once you've got the color that you want, and let's say, for example, for me, I've got these bubbles looking the way I want, with the kind of the blue with the yellow border and the yellow text. I can just right-click any object and select Update Style preset, and that's going to mean that every time I add a new one, it's going to come in that same color combination.
Great. And we just have 2 more questions about this section, and then we can get moving on. How many colors do you recommend in a presentation, firstly? And secondly, how do you feel about using the company logo as the overview?
To answer your first question, I'd say 5 or no more than 5, usually at least 3. There's a reason why things like Adobe Color will have 5. There's a reason why Prezi allows you to have 5. A color palette does allow you to kind of extend beyond that. In my job with the creative services team, we see a lot of company brand guidelines, and most companies won't have more than 5. Some do, but those ones that they have, which are beyond 5, are like, if you have no choice, use this color. So the answer to that question is 3 to 5. How do I feel about using the logo as the overview? That depends on your logo. So if you have a logo which is visual in itself, then I would go ahead and use it. Like just off the top of my head, someone like Evernote, which has that elephant, which is kind of nice to look at. Yeah, sure, go for it. If your logo involves text, I would probably avoid it, because again, we're up against text versus visuals. Hope that answers the question. I shall continue. And we'll look at the build section of the presentation. So this is going to be shorter because The planning stuff was the main part of what I was going to talk about today, but we'll have a look at build. Oh, sorry, careless there. Build. When you actually come to build your presentation and you've got something like a subtopic here, remember to use those icons. And I wanted to practice what I preached here, so I've got icons. And the first icon is about icons, and it's specifically about the noun project. But any of the other places that I mentioned previously in the presentation where you can find icons are great. Text is bad. You probably read, and I know I've read lots of books about presentations from various people, all of whom have done a lot of research and really know what they're talking about. And you'll read things like the 6x6 rule or the 5x3 rule, like no more than 5 lines with no more than 3 words. And those things are useful guides. My rule is always that you can pretty much cut every word from a presentation if you want to. And it's difficult. You'll often write out kind of long sentences and you're like, oh, every word there's important. I really want these people to remember. But if you want them to remember, take the words out, replace it with an image, and speak to it yourself. That's a better way to get people to remember. So yeah, the first point here is to use symbols. The next one is all about adding your content. And what I would say here is use a variety of content when you can. So I've already spoken about icons and pictures, but videos are great. You can add videos really easily from YouTube or from your computer with Prezi, and they make a great way to break up the presentation. Give yourself a chance to rest your voice. I know I'm beginning to get a bit hoarse underneath here, and I'm looking forward to getting a glass of water in a few seconds. But it's a great way to break it up. People love to watch video. We're so used to watching video on our news feeds and on our mobiles these days. So keep that content varied. And again, just try and keep the text to a minimum. And lastly, flare it up. So there's 2 points that I have here. First, don't be afraid to add some flair. So add that point color, which is strong. Add your video that's got some, loud or arresting music in it. Use those tricks to get people's attention. Don't be afraid to do it. Don't be boring. Don't choose to be boring. Like I've seen a lot of people in the corporate world give presentations, and their real main aim is, I don't want to cause any ripples on the pond here. I don't want to do a bad job, obviously, but I also don't want too many questions at the end because I don't want to stand out. I just kind of want to get through the day here. Don't do that. Go for interesting, go for exciting, go for standing out, beating the competition and impressing people and showing off, especially for British people. That's perhaps not normal, but we can do it too. The second point I have is when you do this flair and when you do this decoration, do it at the end of your presentation. The content is the most important thing. That's why I talked about at the beginning, outlining, writing things down on paper, planning. Add the flair, the little decorations. So for me, the decorations in this case was the little yellow shapes that I've added that really kind of content-wise don't add much to the presentation, but just aesthetically make it look that little bit more beautiful. Do that stuff at the end. I see lots of people fall into the trap of, I saw this great presentation where he used this visual style and it looked really good, and you spend your whole time trying to get your content to fit the style or your content to fit the visual, and you're just going to be in trouble if you do it that way around. Do your decorating at the end. Okay, and so then that's that part done. Armin, do we have any questions?
We do have a few coming in that are relevant to this section here. So as a follow-up to the logo and the overview question, thank you for addressing that. For those people that do have to display a company logo throughout the presentation, do you have a recommendation for where they should put that?
The first thing I would say is, why do you have to? I work with a lot of clients, and this is a thing that I come up against all the time. It's like, I have to put it there. I've got these people's attention for 10 minutes and I have to put it there, otherwise they'll forget it. So put it prominently at the beginning, talk about it, you're going to put it at the end. If your content is interesting and engaging otherwise, they're going to come up to you and ask you or get your card and they'll remember who you are. If you've got a really boring presentation with information, you're just going to have a negative association by putting it up all of the time. That having been said, we usually tuck it away in the bottom left-hand corner if we're not able to persuade people not to put it in the presentation. But I would say go back to your boss or whoever it is saying that it must be in there and say, does it have to be? I'm a really big proponent of a consistent color palette and style guidelines and font. Use those things throughout the presentation. But the logo, does it always have to be in there?
Great. So a second question, going to your comment about videos and using video and audio. Joel would like to know what the length of the video should be if you're going to include something like that.
I actually think this is a question Arwen's probably better qualified to answer than me, but I'm sure she would tell you that you're looking at anything below 2 minutes, preferably below a minute. I do remember reading recently that there's a strange phenomenon whereby if you put in a video that's 49 seconds, it's just as appealing as one that's 40 seconds because people look at that first digit, they look at the 4. So so the message behind that was if you've got a video that's 57 seconds, don't worry about cutting it because people are just looking at the 5. But if you've got something that's 41 seconds, try and take it down to 39.
So it's true. As a content marketing manager here at Prezi, I do have quite a bit of insight into when people drop off on videos. And it turns out that if you're doing a specific kind of video where the entire piece of content that you're presenting, meaning you're not doing it in a presentation, you're doing this as the full piece of content you want people to look at, you really shouldn't do more than 1 minute and 30 seconds. People generally will not continue to watch after 30 seconds unless you have an incredibly engaging piece. As for something that is inserted into a presentation and is simply an element that you're including, I would recommend keeping that even to something super duper short, like 10 seconds, especially because it's just a supplementary piece.
Yeah, and I think the point that I made earlier about starting with your opening hook, hitting people with the most interesting thing, also applies to videos. If you think about the videos that you spent a little bit too long watching, they probably had a really powerful beginning that really grabbed your attention. So try and find videos that work to that same rule.
Right, and we'll do one more question before we get into the call to action piece of your presentation here. This is from Jesse, incorporating audio into a Prezi presentation. So I think that this is very similar to the video comment. If you wanted to add a piece of audio, again, it should be very short. It should be definitely engaging and attention grabbing and all of those things, and perhaps not something that you rely on too much to make a point, especially if you're giving that presentation live.
Great. So we can get to the final piece of my presentation, which is the call to action. And it's delightfully short in the fact that this is my call to action and it's now your turn. Go out there, design whatever you feel is going to be great. Make sure it's visually great. Try and follow those rules. Try and do at least a little bit of preparation. Just 5 to 10 minutes sometimes is all you need. I know from my team, the designers who are the most proficient and effective are the ones that really invest in that planning stage and never relent from doing that, even if it's just for a short amount of time. Try and use some of the tips and tricks. We're going to give the presentation out. It's full of great resources. I mean, for me, I can spend hours and hours looking through those online image libraries at some of the really arresting visuals that you get from there. And even if you don't use them this time for this presentation, you remember things in pictures, so they will kind of tuck themselves away into the darker recesses of your mind, and you will find yourself go, oh, I remember that image that I saw, and you'll go back and find it and use it the next time. Icons, not text. If people want to read your presentation, write it down in a document and send them a Word doc. If you want to give a presentation, take the text out, replace it with visuals, and speak to the visual that you've got on the screen. Thank you very much, and I'd love to answer any more questions if there are any.
Oh, there are. We have got questions for you. So speaking of some of the more granular stuff that maybe you can demonstrate, because we do have a little bit of time, how do you insert things like animations, audio files, video files? Can you go through a quick demo of that?
Yeah, absolutely, we can do that. So just let me exit out of here. and we can do it within this presentation. So I'm now within the edit mode. I'm going to come out of that topic and back to my overview. The first thing was how I added an image, and I'm going to go into my coffee cup here because I was just adding in images here. So let's say, oh, not this one, sorry. I'm going to go into creative services. Let's say that I don't feel that Fujitsu and UNICEF are enough justification. Just going to resize that one, move it a little bit to the left, I've got UNICEF, and now I've got some space in this top right-hand corner. I just click this image button here, and then I'm going to select someone else that we worked with recently. Let's go for Verifone. They're a partner of ours. Ooh. And I've got their accounts PNG. Just let me have a look. Oh, no, actually, I really shouldn't put that in. That looks like information that we probably don't want. Let me try someone else that we've worked with. Maybe I've got one with Getty. Okay. Oh, yeah, I've got the Getty logo there. This is a partner we work with quite often. And I can bring that in and put that there. Just going to resize it because you see it doesn't fit. Hopefully you can see on the screen share that there's a kind of faint gray line around all of my content. That shows you what you're going to see when you hit the present button. That's come in with a white background. One thing that I didn't mention when I was talking about bringing in images, if you're using Google Images to look for images, you can, within Google Images, set within the settings for the color of the picture to be transparent. This will give you pictures with transparent backgrounds, so you won't end up with this horrible white that I have over my yellow. I would have just had the black words. The thing to be mindful of when you're using Google Images is if you're giving a big presentation in front of a large group of people, or it's being broadcast on Periscope or whatever it may be, make sure to tick the box within Google or Bing or whatever it is that you're using that means that you're using pictures which are free to use, because there's a lot of copyright and a lot of those, and you, trust me, don't want to get caught out with that. What was the other thing that you want to do? Animations, I can do. So animations, you've got the animations button up there, which is handily labeled. Click it in and you'll bring up the sidebar. So let's say that I want to bring in my pictures of the team one by one. I'm going to click on Gabriele here. I'm going to do a plus. I'm going to fade him in. I'm going to do Jofi, and I'm going to also just do fade her in. If I wanted to bring two in at the same time, I can hold down the Shift key and just drag over Lila and Bernie here. Again, do a fade in. You'll see how that previews them coming in. And I'm going to do Monse at the end as well here. Fade her in. If you ever want to check on how your animations will look, just hover your cursor over the left-hand side here and you click that little play button, and it'll give you a tiny preview of what's going to happen at that moment. To reorder, just click on one and then just drag it down until the other one goes up. So that will now happen in a different order. You can make things fade out. I kind of want to make Getty images there fade out because I haven't chosen a logo with a transparent background. You can also see how that disappears. Animations with Prezi are not just restricted to fading in and fading out. You also have the ability to zoom. So let's say that we want to zoom in on Lila and take a closer look, which I'm sure she'll love me for. I can select her and then I can do zoom to, which will zoom to the closest 16:9 ratio square that it can do. Sometimes you don't want to zoom to a specific object within your presentation, but you might want to zoom to something that kind of overlaps one or two of them. You have two choices there. You can either multi-select things, so hold down that Shift key, and then just zoom to that. Or you can just select nothing, click this plus button here, and add zoom area. Now you can see that we've got a 16:9 blue rectangle. Whatever I do with this rectangle, it will not change from the 16:9 ratio. So that's great because you then know exactly what you're zooming in on. And let's say that I want to, have a little wordplay perhaps and zoom in on vices. I can do just that, and I can preview that there. So those are the animations within Prezi. And if you want to remove an animation, you just select it, hit the delete button, and it shall disappear. And whenever you've got animations on a slide, you'll see that there's a little number that appears up here and to the right. I'll also just quickly talk about how you can get those hex codes in, because I told you that you can bring them in. So I'll just show you exactly where that happens. So if this is my text, you'll see that once I select the text, I have all kinds of options, from changing the preset, the font, making the text bigger and smaller, changing bold, italic, adding a background color, or changing the actual color. And then if you want to add a custom color, click that color palette, open it up, and there down the bottom where that hashtag is, you can just put the code of the color and in it comes.
Great. And speaking of other kinds of files, perhaps an MP4 for some kind of audio or another type of video, is it the same idea with that, or with GIFs, or with any of that as you would with an image?
So bringing in images is the same way I've just showed you. You just click that image button. If you want to insert a video, you'll need to go up to the top menu here, click insert, and then video. And then you have two choices. You can either upload a video. So in my experience, MP4s work best, but Prezi does accept other formats such as M4A, M4V, but in my experience, MP4 just seems to upload the fastest and best. Or you can embed directly from YouTube. So just paste the YouTube URL into here. Thing to remember if you're using YouTube videos for your presentation is the Prezi will still need to connect to YouTube in order for it to play. So you will need reliable internet connection in the moment that you're presenting. If you upload a file from your computer, it's stored within the Prezi. So if you're presenting from Prezi desktop, or what we call a portable Prezi, you won't need that internet connection. So YouTube videos are great, but just make sure that you have a reliable internet connection at the time. If we're relying on YouTube to play a video, we will usually test it out before people come into the room. It's just a little thing to make sure you don't get caught out by technology.
Great. And with the same, are you able to add animated GIFs? And certainly we have a question coming in about the video versus audio. So an audio file would work the same way if you upload it. So, or, you know, were to paste in a URL from the internet. But as David said, make sure that you have a reliable internet connection if you're going to use something that you need to access the internet for. But otherwise, yes, audio can be inserted the same way. So onto the question about GIFs, though.
Yeah, as far as I know, Prezi, at least for the moment, doesn't handle animated GIFs. I do know it's something that we're looking into. It is a technical challenge, but at the moment it's not something that you're able to put into a Prezi. With GIFs, I mean, I personally am a large user of GIFs, especially in things like team chats and any of my kind of blogging and writing that I do. With your presentation, I would be mindful of them, because if you've got them up on a screen and you're talking and they're constantly moving, people are going to be looking at that, not talking to you. Remember, visuals are there to help people remember what you're speaking to and to complement what you're talking about. They can also drive a conversation, as in you put them in front of people and you try and get their attention using them. But if they're distracting people from what you're saying, then they're actually counterproductive. So I would be mindful of putting in a GIF to any presentation.
Great, so we're coming up on the top of the hour here. So I just want to answer a couple more questions, then give you guys some information before we end today's live session. Going back earlier, we had a question about the coffee mug that you chose, and you had a really great answer about why it was that you chose it, but it turns out that Rich was actually looking for some information on how you made it look like a primary topic.
I see, Rich. So what I've done here is I've got my topics arranged out on my presentation. And so if I click a topic here, you can actually see that I've got one hidden within the coffee mug. So what I've done there is I've added a new topic, I brought it in, and then with it selected, I've gone to the fill color and I've just turned the opacity all the way down to the bottom. This in effect makes it invisible. And I've also made sure that the border color is set to a completely minus opacity. Therefore, it can't be seen. When you first do that, you will see text, because whenever you bring in a new topic, you will have the text which says double click to edit. To make sure that this doesn't show up, once you've turned the opacity down, still make sure that you have your topic selected. Click on topic cover settings, go to custom, and then edit cover content. And then the text that's in there, you'll be able to just plain delete it. Excuse me. You'll know that you're working on a cover because you have this dashed line across. Whenever you're editing the cover of a topic, you are just editing the content on the top of it and not the content underneath. So I can do anything here, click away from it, zoom back into it, and the content within stays the same.
Wonderful. So just one final question. We actually have quite a few great questions coming in, but we're not going to be able to get to them all today. So I will do my best to either provide information that I think will help you answer the questions you had if we don't get to them, or answer them directly in that follow-up that we have. Carol would like to know if you are able to set a presentation to run automatically without manually stepping through each slide.
Carol, you are able to do that, but in order to do that, you will need to export your Prezi presentation as a portable Prezi. So you can do this. I believe that you have to have one of our paid licenses, and then you'll have access to our desktop application. And when you've got your desktop application, I can show you. Oh, just come out of there. When you've got your desktop application, you've got it open, and let's say that I wanted to have this presentation run through. I can then, click on this arrow here. I can do download for presentation. This will export it either to Windows or to Mac. And then once you have that, and you've loaded that up as a normal Prezi presentation, a portable presentation is one that you can't edit, you can only show. There's a cogwheel in the bottom right-hand corner, and that has an autoplay feature. And you can set your Prezi to, to move every 2, every 4, or every 10 or 20 seconds.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, David, for the awesome presentation today. And thank you, everyone who joined us today and who stuck with us until the end. I really appreciate it. For anybody that was registered today, you will get a recording of this entire live webinar sent to you in the next couple of days in a follow-up email. That email will also include a link so that you can view David's Prezi presentation. And we will also include some follow-up emails and other information to help answer some of the questions that we didn't get to today. So once again, thank you guys so much for joining us today. And if you are interested in registering for next week's webinar, we will send some information out for you to be able to do that as well. We have a great guest coming up, also named David, interestingly enough, but a very different David indeed. So he'll be talking to us about including humor and the right way to present to large audiences and maintain your humor and give a great message at the same time. So once again, thanks everybody, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your week.